One brutal ambush stole everything a 40-year-old cowboy had spent his life building. Beaten, robbed, and left to freeze in the mountains, he expected to die alone. But when a lonely widow opened her door, she didn't ask his name or where he'd come from. She asked just one simple question that changed both of their lives forever.
Stay with us until the end to discover how two broken strangers found a family where neither expected one.
And if you enjoy heartfelt Western stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and join our journey. Cold December wind swept through the narrow mountain pass outside Pine Creek, Montana, carrying loose snow across the frozen trail while gray clouds swallowed the afternoon sun. Luke Carter was 40 years old and had spent more than 2 decades working other men's ranches before finally saving enough to build a future of his own. Standing just over 6 feet tall, he carried the broad shoulders of a lifetime in the saddle, weathered hands thick with old scars, a square jaw hidden beneath a neatly trimmed dark beard, and calm blue eyes that rarely betrayed emotion. Friends had often described him as dependable rather than talkative. Losing both parents before the age of 20 had taught him that hard work outlasted grief, while years of lonely cattle drives had made silence feel more comfortable than conversation. Now every dollar he owned rode behind him in a single wagon. 2 draft horses pulled his belongings. Farming tools, sacks of seed, several breeding cattle, winter supplies, and a small iron box holding every cent he had saved. Tucked safely beneath the wagon seat rested an old silver pocket watch, the last gift his father had ever given him. Luke wasn't chasing wealth. He only wanted a quiet piece of land where no one could tell him when to move on. The canyon narrowed unexpectedly, forcing the wagon between steep walls of black stone. Luke noticed the silence first. No birds, no wind, no movement. Instinct tightened every muscle in his body just as a rifle cracked from the ridge above. One horse collapsed instantly, dragging the wagon sideways before it slammed into a boulder and rolled onto its side. Luke reached for his revolver, but another shot shattered the wagon wheel beside him. 5 armed outlaws emerged from the rocks, their faces hidden beneath dusty hats and wool scarves. One tall outlaw struck Luke across the back of the head with a rifle stock before he could fire a single round. Dizzy and surrounded by 5 loaded rifles, he understood there was no fight to win. Darkness greeted him when he finally opened his eyes. The wagon was gone, the cattle were gone, the horses, supplies, money, even his father's pocket watch had vanished. Only his empty revolver remained beside him, half buried in frozen snow. Blood trickled down his neck as despair settled deeper than the mountain cold. For 3 endless days he wandered through the wilderness with little more than stubborn determination keeping him alive. Just as his legs threatened to give out beneath him, a thin ribbon of chimney smoke rose beyond the trees from a lonely farmhouse resting beneath the snow-covered hills. Luke stood at the edge of the weather-beaten barn long after spotting the thin ribbon of smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney. Every instinct told him to keep walking. Pride had carried him through lonely winters, failed cattle drives, and countless nights beneath open skies. But now pride weighed heavier than the ache in his empty stomach. He slipped quietly through the half-open barn door, hoping only to bury himself beneath loose hay until dawn before disappearing without burdening anyone. The warm scent of dry alfalfa and horses wrapped around him like a forgotten memory, and for the first time in days, his trembling body began to relax. The creak of the barn door snapped him awake. A lantern cut through the darkness, followed by steady footsteps that showed neither panic nor hesitation. Standing in the doorway was Sarah Bennett. At 37, she possessed the quiet strength of someone who had survived more than she ever spoke about. She was slightly above average height with a lean frame shaped by years of lifting feed sacks, chopping wood, and repairing fences alone. Her chestnut hair was tied into a simple knot, though loose strands framed a face weathered by mountain winters rather than age. Pale gray-blue eyes studied everything with careful patience, while sun-browned skin and rough hands revealed a life built on labor instead of comfort. Since losing her husband, Daniel Bennett, to a simple leg wound that became a deadly infection 2 winters earlier, Sarah had stopped expecting life to be fair. She trusted hard work, routine, and practical decisions far more than emotions. She noticed Luke's torn coat, dried blood beneath his hairline, and the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. She did not ask why he had hidden in her barn. She simply rested one hand on the wooden pitchfork she carried and asked in a calm voice, "Have you eaten today?" Luke opened his mouth to answer, but the sharp cramp twisting through his stomach spoke before he could. Embarrassment flooded him. He had faced stampedes, blizzards, and armed rustlers without lowering his eyes. Yet that simple question stripped away every wall he had built around himself. Sarah sighed softly, as though hunger was merely another chore waiting to be handled. "Come inside before you freeze," she said. "I'd rather feed a hungry man than bury one behind my barn." The farmhouse was small but spotless. Every tool hung in its proper place. Every log beside the stove stacked with exact care. The scent of vegetable soup, fresh bread, and burning pine filled the single-room cabin. Luke hesitated at the doorway, painfully aware of the mud dripping from his boots onto the clean wooden floor. Sarah pointed toward a hook near the entrance. "Hang your coat there. The stove will dry it." Without another word, she ladled thick potato soup into a stone bowl, added 2 slices of warm bread, and placed them before him. Luke tried to eat slowly, remembering the manners his mother had once insisted upon, but hunger overwhelmed dignity. Within minutes the bowl was empty, every crumb of bread gone. Ashamed, he finally looked up, expecting judgment. Sarah was quietly sewing a torn work shirt beside the fire, paying no attention to the speed at which he had eaten. She poured him another cup of water before speaking again. "There's more if you're still hungry." Luke swallowed hard. "Why would you help a stranger?" Sarah paused, her needle resting between rough fingers. "Because winter doesn't care whether a man deserves saving." Silence settled comfortably over the room. Outside, snow continued piling against the cabin walls while wind rattled the loose shutters. Inside, the fire cracked softly between 2 lonely souls carrying different wounds. Before extinguishing the lantern, Sarah spread a thick wool blanket beside the stone fireplace. "Sleep there tonight," she said without looking back. "If you're feeling stronger by morning, the road will still be waiting." Luke lay awake, staring into the fading embers. He had lost his ranch, his savings, and every possession that had defined the future he imagined. Yet one bowl of soup, one warm fire, and one unexpected act of kindness had given him something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. As sleep finally claimed him, he realized he no longer feared freezing to death before sunrise. Luke awoke before sunrise, his eyes opening to the gentle crackle of the fire and the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the cabin. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. Then reality returned. The warmth surrounding him belonged to someone else, and every hour he remained under Sarah Bennett's roof felt like a debt he could never repay. He quietly folded the wool blanket, placed it exactly where she had left it, slipped into his still damp coat, and decided he would leave before she had the chance to offer another meal. Outside, the air carried the sharp bite of another mountain morning. Snow covered the valley in uneven drifts. But daylight exposed the quiet struggles hidden beneath winter's beauty. Luke paused near the barn and instinctively surveyed the property the way an experienced ranch hand always did. One hinge on the barn gate had nearly torn free from the weathered post. The northern fence leaned dangerously where heavy snow had crushed several rails. Half the woodshed stood nearly empty, while loose shingles on the hay barn roof fluttered every time the wind crossed the ridge. None of it looked neglected. It looked like more work than one person could possibly finish before another storm arrived. Luke tightened his jaw. Without speaking to anyone, he found an old toolbox hanging inside the barn, removed the warped hinge, straightened it with a hammer against a flat stone, and carved a replacement wooden pin from a broken fence rail. The gate swung smoothly again just as footsteps crunched through the snow behind him. Sarah stood on the porch, holding 2 steaming tin cups. She watched him for several seconds without interrupting. Instead of asking why he had stayed, she simply walked halfway across the yard and placed 1 cup on the porch railing before returning inside. No invitation, no gratitude, only hot coffee waiting where he would see it. Luke understood. He picked up the cup after finishing the gate, drinking the bitter coffee while staring across the valley. It had been years since anyone had trusted him without demanding something in return. The work continued naturally. He climbed onto the hay barn roof and replaced broken shingles using spare cedar boards stacked beneath the eaves. He shoveled snow away from the stable walls before melting ice could rot the timber. He split firewood until fresh blisters opened beneath old calluses, then kept swinging anyway. Every evening another stack of neatly cut logs appeared beside the cabin door before Sarah ever asked for them. Sarah noticed everything, even if she rarely commented. She began leaving extra biscuits wrapped in cloth near the woodshed before dawn, knowing Luke often skipped breakfast to start working. When his gloves finally split across both palms, she quietly placed a sturdy leather pair beside his coat without mentioning where they came from. Neither thanked the other. Their kindness existed without conversation. By the end of the first week, the farm itself seemed to breathe easier. The repaired fences stood firm against the wind. The roof no longer leaked when snow melted beneath the afternoon sun. The woodshed held enough split pine to last weeks instead of days. Luke found peace in the rhythm of honest labor. Every repaired board erased a little of the helplessness he had carried since the ambush. Every swing of the axe reminded him that while thieves had stolen his possessions, they had failed to steal his hands, his experience, or his determination. For the first time since waking alone in the frozen canyon, he stopped thinking about everything he had lost. Sarah watched him through the kitchen window one evening as he quietly repaired a broken wheelbarrow long after sunset. She realized something unexpected. Luke had never once asked if he could stay another night. He had never asked for money, clothing, or even the return of his strength. The only thing he seemed to want was another day's work waiting with the morning light. When darkness settled over the valley, Sarah opened the front door and spoke only 5 words. "Dinner's getting cold, Mr. Carter." Luke looked toward the warm glow spilling from the cabin windows. For the first time in many years, walking through another person's doorway no longer felt like accepting charity. It felt like earning it. Spring arrived reluctantly in Pine Creek. Snow retreated into the shadows beneath the pines, while muddy ground replaced frozen earth, filling the air with the scent of wet timber and thawing soil. Life slowly returned. But Luke had learned long ago that danger often followed the first warm days of the year. He was driving fresh fence posts behind the barn when unfamiliar hoofbeats drifted across the valley. They were too steady to belong to neighbors. Luke rested the post driver against his shoulder and listened. 5 horses, 5 riders. His stomach tightened before his mind caught up. He stepped quietly to the corner of the barn and looked through the narrow gap between 2 weathered boards. The riders entered the yard without asking permission. Even beneath months of dirt and worn trail coats, Luke recognized them instantly. The broad-shouldered leader with the crooked nose, the thin rider whose left ear had been torn nearly in half, the heavy man with the red beard who had struck him unconscious with a rifle stock. They were the same outlaws who had stolen every possession he had owned that winter. The leader swung lazily from his saddle and glanced toward the cabin. "Looks like a widow's place," he muttered with a grin. "Easy supplies before we head south." None of them noticed Luke. Sarah stepped onto the porch carrying her Winchester. Her expression remained calm, but Luke noticed the way her fingers tightened around the rifle. She stood straight, despite facing 5 armed strangers alone. "We're not selling anything," she said evenly. "Turn around." The men laughed. The red-bearded outlaw took 2 slow steps toward the gate. Luke's pulse slowed instead of quickening. Charging into 5 armed men had nearly cost him his life once already. He would not make the same mistake twice. He slipped behind the stacked firewood beside the barn, using the repaired fence as cover. Every board, every wagon rut, every pile of lumber had become familiar after months of work. This was no longer unknown ground. The first outlaw reached for the gate latch. Luke exploded from behind the woodpile. One powerful shoulder drove into the man's ribs before he could react. The outlaw crashed face first into the mud, his revolver flying from his hand. Luke kicked the weapon beneath the wagon without slowing. The yard erupted. 2 riders jerked their horses backward in surprise while another struggled to draw his pistol. Before anyone could aim, Sarah fired. The Winchester thundered across the valley. The bullet sliced through the sleeve of the thin outlaw, tearing flesh along his upper arm. He cried out, dropped his revolver, and grabbed the wound instead. "Behind the wagon!" the leader shouted. But confusion had already taken over. The outlaws had expected one frightened widow. Instead, they found an unseen defender attacking from cover, while accurate rifle fire pinned them from the porch. None of them knew whether Luke was alone or whether more rifles waited behind the buildings. Luke grabbed the second outlaw before the man recovered his balance, driving him hard against the fence post. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. A quick strike to the jaw left him unconscious in the mud. The remaining three hesitated. That single moment decided everything. The leader cursed loudly. "We're leaving!" He hauled the wounded outlaw onto a horse, while another dragged the unconscious man across a saddle. None of them bothered searching for dropped weapons. Within seconds they disappeared down the muddy trail, splashing through melting snow as fast as frightened horses could carry them. Silence settled over the farm once again. Luke breathed heavily while scanning the empty road. Only after he was certain they were gone did he notice something glimmering beside the unconscious outlaw's discarded coat. He bent down slowly. An old silver pocket watch rested inside the torn pocket. His father's initials remained engraved across the back. For several long seconds Luke simply stared at it. Everything else was gone forever. The wagon, the cattle, the money, the land he had dreamed of buying. Yet somehow this single piece of his family had found its way back into his hands. He slipped the watch into his coat pocket without speaking. Then another thought settled over him. Sarah had seen everything. She had watched the calm ranch hand disappear and the hardened survivor take his place. She had seen how quickly violence returned to his hands when danger appeared. That evening, after washing the mud and blood from his face, Luke quietly rolled his blanket, packed his few belongings, and placed them beside the front door. He believed sunrise would be the right time to leave. Luke waited until the cabin had fallen silent before lifting his bedroll from the floor beside the fireplace. He packed carefully, folding the blanket Sarah had lent him, cleaning the coffee cup he had used that morning, and placing his father's silver pocket watch deep inside his coat. It was the only piece of his former life that had returned to him. Everything else belonged to the past. He believed leaving before sunrise would spare Sarah from the burden of choosing between kindness and caution. The front door creaked softly behind him. "I thought you'd try to leave before breakfast," Sarah said. Luke stopped, but did not turn around immediately. "You saw what happened yesterday," he answered quietly. "Those men came because they thought this place was easy to rob. If they ever come back, it'll be because they know I'm here." Sarah walked closer until she stood beside the kitchen table. Morning light filtered through the window, softening the lines of exhaustion that had settled on her face for years. She folded her work-worn arms across her faded apron and looked directly at him. "They didn't come because of you," she replied. "They came because they believed a widow lived here alone." Luke lowered his eyes. "I've spent years trying to keep this farm standing by myself," Sarah continued. "Storms don't care if I'm tired. Broken fences don't repair themselves. Wolves don't ask whether I'm grieving before they kill a calf." She stepped toward the front window, looking across the yard Luke had rebuilt with his own hands. "I don't need a man who wears polished boots and speaks beautiful words." She turned back toward him. "I need a man who fixes the gate before the cattle escape. I need someone who chops wood before winter reaches the valley. I need someone willing to stand between this house and men like those riders." Luke searched her face for fear. He found none, only certainty. For months he had believed strength was something shameful, something that separated him from ordinary people. Sarah saw it differently. She did not admire violence, but neither did she condemn a man for defending innocent lives. "I've spent years running," Luke admitted. "Every ranch, every trail. I always believed it was easier to leave before someone had a reason to send me away." Sarah smiled for the first time since he had met her. It was small, almost reluctant, but it transformed her weathered face. "Then stop running." Those 3 words settled deep inside him. Luke unpacked his bedroll and carried it back beside the fireplace. Spring slowly became summer. Together they rebuilt every corner of the farm. Luke expanded the northern pasture, repaired the aging barn foundation, and built a stronger corral from lodgepole pine. Sarah managed the livestock, planted larger vegetable fields, and kept careful records of every dollar they earned. They argued occasionally about fences, weather, and stubborn cattle, but never about trust. Neighbors who had once pitied Sarah now respected the quiet partnership growing on the hillside. They noticed the healthy horses, repaired buildings, and growing herd long before they noticed the affection developing between the two hard-working souls. Neither Luke nor Sarah rushed toward marriage. Neither needed promises to prove loyalty. Their lives had already become woven together through ordinary mornings, shared labor, and countless silent evenings beside the same fire. Exactly 1 year after Luke had been robbed in the mountain pass, the first wildflowers appeared around the porch where Sarah had once placed a single cup of coffee without asking questions. That evening, Luke reached into his pocket and removed his father's silver watch. Hidden inside its cover rested a simple gold ring his father had tucked there decades earlier, intending one day to give it to Luke's future bride. Luke had carried it unknowingly through every hardship until now. He walked onto the porch where Sarah sat watching the sunset spread across the valley. Without grand speeches, he knelt before her. "I came here believing I'd lost everything," he said softly. "I was wrong. I just hadn't found home yet." Sarah's eyes filled with quiet tears as she nodded before he could even finish the question. The following spring they married in the small white church at Pine Creek, with only a handful of neighbors attending. Luke never recovered his stolen fortune, but he never searched for it again. The outlaws had taken his wagon, his cattle, and every dollar he owned. Yet by stealing the road he had planned to travel, they unknowingly led him to the only destination that truly mattered, a home built not with money, but with trust, quiet devotion, and two people who chose to stay. Every one of us carries something the world cannot see. Sometimes it's a loss. Sometimes it's a regret. Sometimes it's simply the quiet hope that tomorrow will be a little kinder than today. Luke and Sarah remind us that healing doesn't always begin with grand gestures. More often, it begins with a door left open, a warm meal shared, a helping hand, or the simple decision to stay when walking away would be easier. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're watching from, or tell us about a small act of kindness that changed your life. If you believe stories like these deserve to reach more people, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next journey. Wherever you are today, may God bless you with strength for every challenge, peace for every burden, hope for every tomorrow, and loved ones who stand beside you when life feels hardest. Thank you for spending your time with us, and until next time, may God watch over you and your family.